How do you make comics without all the frustration, without feeling lousy and inadequate all the time? Join me, Jess Ruliffson,
And me, Tom Hart.
on the Terrible Anvil. Each week, we build community and shift our mindset about what it means to make comics and art. We're working through the whole process, one piece at a time, turning our suffering and angst into fun and glee. Join us at sawcomics.org.
All right, we're live. This is the Sequential Artists Workshop, and this is the Terrible Anvil. I'm Tom Hart,
I'm Jess Ruliffson.
and something we didn't mention last time is that we're both Eisner nominees, and that you should know that if you're listening to this podcast, that this is coming to you from Eisner-nominated cartoonists Jess Ruliffson and Tom Hart, right?
Yes, I'm putting double Eisner nominees in the chat. It just means one of us a piece, but two of us together.
And and this is episode 2, and we are titling it, or at least to begin with, "Lean into the bad" or "Lean into the worst." And Jess, what does that mean?
That's a good question. It remains to be seen, but I think the idea is we're riffing on what was hardest about comics last week. So, and thinking about identifying first what's the most tricky for you personally, and there's a lot of people agreeing with certain things like drawing or thumbnailing or lettering or something technical or something more spiritual. And then once you've identified, wow, that's really hard, how do you make a home there in the ruins?
Make a home there. I noticed something in scouring the Jess Ruliffson archives. I noticed that rendering of hands is mentioned often, and I'm starting to wonder if this is something particular to you, Jess. Do you struggle with drawing hands?
I just use it as a good example. I could certainly be better at it.
Well, I wasn't trying to needle you, but I just wondered if that was something that you have yourself leaned into. And I also saw that in the chat, in the pre-warm-up chat, somebody was talking about backgrounds too, and we can go into that, I guess.
Ooh, backgrounds. Yeah, backgrounds are like the elevated cartoonist specific version of what's hard. I think anyone making art and trying to draw the figure, I saw it a lot in the pre-college cartooning class that and myself as a cartoonist or an artist in high school and middle school, I'd always put the hands of my characters away behind the figure or into some pockets. So I think that's such a clear example that lives in my memory is like, oh, no one likes to draw hands, and we get around it by finding a secret place for the fingers to go that's not out and about, I guess, because it's easier to draw. I see like an avoidance of that, so it's kind of fun to acknowledge that. But backgrounds are similar too. Some people really enjoy backgrounds, but the rest of us mortals have to figure out how to draw them. Do you like drawing backgrounds, Tom?
I want to address a couple of those things you said, but to answer that question, it's gotten to the point where I only like drawing rocks and trees. So I don't know if those are backgrounds or not, if that's all you're drawing. That's one reason I sort of stopped drawing, is because I was like, do I have to put a character here? But on the subject of hands, there's an old Charlie Brown strip where Linus notices that Charlie Brown has drawn a character with his hands behind his back, and Linus says, "I noticed that you've drawn him with his hands behind his back." And it's showing that he's a little bit a little bit shy and reserved and this and that, and he's analyzing him philosophically and psychologically. And Charlie Brown, of course, says, "No, I just couldn't draw hands." It's a classic comment. But also, like, I want to sort of talk about this subject. Like, if you were to lean into the worst, like, how many pages of comics could you draw where, like, you showed no hands purposefully, right? Where you maybe cut them off at the at the side of the panel, or you had people just doing all sorts of stuff with I don't know, enormous gloves on, um or always behind their back, right? It's kind of like, it just seems like a great idea to try that, right? To try, how do you lean into the bad? I can't draw hands, so at least once try and draw that without doing it. What about you?
What was the question?
Don't double dip. I think you're busy in the chat. I can
Well,
handle.
I'm trying to immortalize what you're saying in the chat so I can use it for the recap and help our peers. Also, I just thought of a great band name, Tom Hart and the Bad Hands.
And the bad hands. So,
Maybe in
um,
your
but we can, but again, backgrounds is another thing. And like, and, there's, again, building on what we were saying last week, there's no right way to make comics, right? And if you really, really, really aren't going to draw backgrounds because you've just decided that that's just not your thing, you could easily make good comics without them. Garfield has very few backgrounds, but also, you can make a comic that's just monologues or dialogues. There's plenty of ways around it. It's just that you might have to change, your epic fantasy comic might not work if you're not drawing backgrounds, but other comics might. So
That's true. Yeah, I'm trying to think of where I started with backgrounds. I tended to draw every leaf on every tree, which was a thrill, but also um, after one of the first times I printed my own zines and went to a comics festival, I saw how quickly people read comics, i.e., pick it up and throw it back down on the table and wander off. I was like scandalized. I was like, I spent all this time drawing these leaves and no one's appreciating my amazing backgrounds. So when I realized no one was looking, I was like, oh, maybe I don't have to work that hard. And I wanted to work faster. So I started kind of, for lack of a better word, drawing more cartoony. And then I kind of forgot about backgrounds and was okay with not really having very much in there. And I'm not very good at perspective. And Tom has called me out on that before. He's like, "This doesn't look right at all." And I'm like, I know." But now I'm realizing there's kind of, you know, I kind of think of bootleggery sort of things you could do. Like, well, if something's really close to us, it'll be big, and if it's really far away, it'll be small. And I play more with scale and design, and I can get away with insinuating a background or a space just on the design alone. And I've really come to understand the value of props in trying to make comics like the last piece we did for the Boston Globe, thinking about making a print comic and also making a version of the same comic that would work as a vertical scroll. Some of those elements sort of float in space. So I think someone mentioned things float in space. That can actually be a good thing because then you can move stuff around in the digital version. I don't fully understand it myself, but having flexibility with the items can be good if you're translating from web to print, and then you don't necessarily have to be married to a background. But backgrounds are set design for comics. So like where if it's important, is the location important? How can we tell we're at that location? For example, if we're at a hospital, drawing what looks the hospital backgrounds themselves, like the walls of the hospital, not very beautiful, not very exciting, not a lot of dramatic angles. So a gurney or an IV pole or a lot of it you have to base on like people's outfits, like everyone's dressed like they're at a hospital. So getting the characters into character and then set dressing was once I started thinking about it like that, it became more fun. It was in service to the narrative versus something I had to do because I wanted to be a real cartoonist and real cartoonists draw backgrounds, I guess.
there's so much there. There's so much to respond to. I love that you said scale and design, that you're insinuating a background from scale and design, right? So I guess you're drawing these props, you're designing them into the panel, and you're just giving us enough indication that we're somewhere, right? That the story is happening somewhere. And if I heard you correctly, you're also altering some of those design elements slightly differently for web or for print, which is somewhere I never would have expected us to be 10, 15 years ago. So suddenly it's not about quote drawing backgrounds. It's like it's for our particular medium or for our particular audience. How do we present the design elements so that they know where the story's happening? That's really wild.
Hmm. And I don't know. I've only watched a little bit of improv comedy, but the really, really good stuff is so funny when people make a big deal out of a prop or a situation or something, and all the actors are rallying around this small detail. And I think that's something that's happening with me subconsciously when I'm trying to build a story in comics is like, what's this weird prop? Like in the last comic we did, there's a scanner like you would maybe see at a grocery store, but you scan all the different barcodes in the patient's room and medicines and the bracelet that the patient wears. And it's really annoying. It makes a beeping sound. And I was and I there and the whole comic was about all the loudness of being in the hospital and all the beeps and things. And it's 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 kind of a humorless experience to be very sick and in the hospital or taking care of sick people. But something about that I thought was really funny, I guess, because I'm easily annoyed and I lived in New York too long and there's always a noise that I was like, what is that noise? So this object, this like weird scanner, it's like doesn't have any hard edges. It's phallic. It's hard to draw. Like, and it flashes and it beeps. It seemed kind of comical to have this like weird object that was had a lot of power over the characters in the comic.
And it helped remind us readers that we're in this loud, weird medical environment, right? Constantly scanning you and yeah, wow, that's really interesting.
Well, and maybe like some of the props you can use in a comic have their own storytelling abilities. Like they're sort of like miniature best supporting actors and actresses. Like the scanner became an illustration for like how technology is a barrier between the human caring for another human. It's just this beepy loud thing that you have to mess
Mhm.
with. It also helps that like I've seen the protagonist of the comic, my partner, I've seen him in instances where he's like shouting at his phone, like, this doesn't make any sense. Or like we all struggle with technology. I feel like everyone once a day has a monologue about some stupid software update they hate. Tom can't ever find how to raise his hand on Zoom. I don't even know how I got here. We're lucky we found the link. It's a miracle that this podcast is being recorded, but so there, even though that's hyper specific, it's very relatable. So I think you can lean it, maybe leaning into the bad is like,
Mhm.
I didn't go into that comic thinking, man, I can't wait to draw this scanner. It's like, I hate drawing hands. I don't know if I'm good at them, but then having a hand holding this strange thing, I was like, that's gonna look weird. You know, going into it, you think maybe this will look weird. Is this gonna make sense? But I could understand the point of it and the humor in it. So even if the drawing was eluding me, I knew what it was supposed to be doing.
But it makes it so much more particular, doesn't it? Like and more almost personal, right? You know, it could have been a dry comic about a hospital with all the things that go on in a hospital, but it's got this weird Jessism of this like weird device that just always beeping. And I know actually the sound in that story was sort of part of the point as well. So, but I don't know, it's great that you leaned into that.
It
Ra
lented.
yeah, rather than again trying to make it a dry hospital comic.
And you can kind of think about like sometimes what we're drawn to in drawing, no pun intended, or the story itself, we're thinking about what we're already good at. Like maybe
Mhm.
I'm I'm trying to think, maybe you really love drawing noses and you're like, oh, that guy's nose is awesome. I can't wait to draw it. So that's a little bit of something to look forward to. But in my head, as like technical medical equipment and how big it should be, like I did have my husband take some pictures of certain things and I did get him, I was like, can you take a picture of your hand with the scanner? Like it's good for me to have photo reference, but if you go into it thinking it's going to be really difficult, you could also go into it thinking, how is this really funny? And
Mhm.
that's something that motivates me, I guess, because they keep drawing serious things, and I always joke that I want to draw butts. I haven't gotten to draw nearly enough butts in my career yet, but that'll be my second act, I guess. But yeah, thinking about what you want to get out of it, like I don't want to draw technical medical equipment, but that is something that I sort of have to draw in for the sake of the story. But how can I make it XYZ to lean into the bad, I guess.
Um, okay, so let's pick up from last episode where we were talking about that, or let's pick up some things off the list. What are some
Yeah.
things people are asking about related to this
We-
topic?
well, that's a good question. We have a couple of comments and no one's ever under pressure to stay on topic because we don't. But we did ask on the network. We're like, okay, this week's topic, lean into the worst. And I sort of asked, you know, I think how did I phrase it on the network? I'm trying to find what the question was, but what do you do? Or when you notice something's not going so great,
Oh,
or what part of it is like specifically even worse? We kind of asked last week what's bad, but we're like, what's really, really bad? It feels like the sequel
I can
kind
make
of.
as you were
Um,
searching, I can make a little comment because it came up in the network just today,
sure.
just about a half an hour ago, and one of our students, um, uh, I think it was Eva, said I, they were posting a pencil drawing and they said, I quickly learned that my eraser doesn't like being an eraser. It's more of a smudger. And to me, that's smudge, make a smudge comic, make it super smudgy, which I
Oh,
know is not everybody's inclination because they want the eraser to do the right thing, which is like clean it up, right? But
yes.
oh, I wanted to see a
I love that.
smudge
There
comic.
should be a prison for whoever invents these erasers that are just smearing things around. Why are like 80% of erasers are just nonsense. But it is funny, right? When you where a good eraser is hard to find. This is life. How do you lean into it? Yeah, that's really good. One of the questions we had this week, I'm trying to find it. Well, one of the early comments we got was from Helen, and she was wondering how can we contrive external deadlines other than self-imposed deadlines? And sometimes deadlines or just getting work out the door is one of the hardest things to lean into. We want so much to share our work. I feel like sometimes we don't necessarily want to do all of the work. We want to do the work, but certain parts of it are really hard to slog through. And then life being what it is, things come up and it's hard to be regimented, I suppose. Um, I wonder
Well,
if you're pretty good. I know you said, well, and you got sick of it. You laid out a schedule for yourself. You're doing like a page a week, right, Tom?
I can't even remember the days when but I did a song a
How
day for a
busy is
while. But I think what Helen's asking is like, aside from those self-imposed ones, which is like, I want to do a page a week or whatever, how can
right?
how can we create some external ones? And a lot of time that's, I think, going to come down to accountability and people, other people waiting for it, right? So
And the chilling realization of your own mortality. If you can just get that lurking at all times. If you
you
wake up
mean
fearing your own death.
when you put the big grid in front of you where you were like, oh, I have X number of days to live and at best, and like this is the number of comics I can get done. You mean that
I think we did
realization?
have a student that was maybe not exactly in their golden years exactly, but on the short end of the traditional uh human lifespan. And they were like, I want to make like 10 of these. Do I have enough time on this mortal coil to finish 10 books? Can I do this?
Yeah, well, it's tricky, um, but let's answer Helen. That to me, I really do think having somebody waiting for it is really important.
Yeah.
Sometimes that somebody can be an accountability partner. I've had that a couple times where I'm just like, just make sure I send you an email on Thursday showing what I did, right?
Yeah.
That alone can help. Um, Better is having a little group of people expecting it, like, and that can be like, hey, there's like four of us and we're doing our twice yearly anthology and we need everybody's thing in here by Valentine's Day or whatever, and then everybody starts to get mad at each other if it's not there.
Yeah.
But then, and you can scale that up, or it can be like, I want to get this done by SPX because SPX is coming out, or I have to get it to submit it to the Saw anthology or whatever. But having somebody who's going to be disappointed, but lovingly disappointed if you don't deliver, I think to me that's the way to do that. Yeah.
Totally.
Rob says in the chat, you do not want to let someone down.
Yeah, and he had also shared similar to what you said that there are conventions and anthologies and things you can participate in that have a natural deadline. So, hey, are you going to SBX, the Small Press Expo? Oh yeah, I'm going. Do you want a table together? Let's split the expenses. Well, we need something for the table. Do you have a comic? I haven't been working on anything. How's it going with you? Well, maybe we could cobble together these things we have. So yeah, sharing resources, but then also sharing the energy of building something together and getting it out the door at the same time is really, really exciting. What would you say, Tom, to someone who didn't have any comics friends yet, aside from please join us at
Yeah, well,
Comics?
I mean that's just a chance for a commercial break, right? Like,
Well, did you ever have, I mean, you're a social person and I am too, but did you ever have periods of time where you're working on something and it felt a little lonely, like it was hard? You didn't really necessarily had externalized accountability?
I think I didn't really do anything until I entered college and I met a couple friends and we were all on the same page and we did weird little anthologies. And then it became like, hey, we want to get this out by next Friday. Everybody's got to have their thing in. And there's a little bit of wiggle room because everybody's flaky and they're 19 years old or whatever. But um but ever since then, I think I've always been a part of some small group. However, I was always the weirdo when like everybody was like, "Hey, we're all going out to the bar for beers and French fries. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "No, I'm staying home to draw," because I actually liked drawing more than a lot of other experiences. So that's not everybody is that way, but that community really matters and mattered to me. So yeah, I don't know. And going back again, going back to leaning into the bad and all these things that make us feel bad when we're making comics. If we can find a community of people who share our values and like, I don't care that you can't draw hands, just give me the damn comic, right? Get it to me by Friday. We got to find those people unless we want to be like, hey, I want to get better at hands, help me get better at hands by Friday. And then you find those people. And I think we just find the right people is the right answer.
Yeah, and it might not be like an overnight thing, and the right people kind of it's an ebb and flow and a shift and a change. So you just like
Mhm.
be nice to everybody and see. I have a lot of nice friends, but we're all like you said, like we're all like artsy. So sometimes it's hard to get everybody together and be accountable. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other external things, but people are really motivating to us because they're less abstract than the last page of our comic.
Mm.
Remember when I turned in my manuscript for my graphic novel? It was like the final art, and I
The
uploaded
Eisner nominated graphic novel.
the Eisner nominated Invisible Wounds Fantagraphics 2022. I turned the file in, and um, I think I'd uploaded to Google Drive and shared the link with the editor, and I was like, "It's here." And I looked around my apartment and nothing had changed. My cat was like lounging and I think I was home alone too. So I was just like, oh, I was like happy it was gonna happen. It was like thrilled to be done, but also I think sometimes it it still feels kind of abstract even when you do finish the work. So having other people to give you a little bit of context maybe or
Sure.
people also have better memories than I do. I mean, I have a bad memory to begin with, but I it's nice. For example, Tom's like, "You were nominated for an Eisner." Heck, I was nominated for an Eisner, and we forgot to talk about it. So having a friend that remembers what you're good at and tells you all the time can kind of like help you think, "Oh yeah, actually, if Tom says it, it's probably more likely to be true than whatever stuff I'm telling myself."
Mm.
Not always, but like you could be selective about what you want to listen to. But yeah, I think having people that reinforce the good about yourself that you might be prone to forget. Or when we panic, I don't know, when I panic about the deadline for the Boston Globe, the 2 times we've done it, it's gone exactly the same where I procrastinate and things get harder and harder, and I'm like, "Then why didn't we ever say yes?" And, um, and when my partner's writing it, he freaks out, and then when I'm finishing drawing it, he freaks out, and whichever one of us is not in the hot seat, the other one's like, "It was just like last time, and you got through it, and it was totally fine, and it looked amazing." But having someone remind you of your track record is really, really valuable, I think, to feeling not only like meeting that deadline, but also like feeling like it could actually happen.
That's a good segue. Although Adrian is posting some interesting things in the chat that we can really quickly mention. Adrian says making your comic a web comic can help for those deadlines, but you have to be conscious of whether posting it is appealing, or if it's getting responses. If you're getting zero responses, then it demotivates you. So that is something. And then she says an interpersonal approach might be better, which is what we're arguing for. It's like find some people who know you and want to expect the things that you want them to expect. Uh,
Yes.
and then Adrian also mentions that some people like Catherine Woodman Maynard use a little cubby hole that she stacks stones up into to celebrate. I think she's very easily excited by these uh, small little devices that is good for some people. I think this is a good segue to something I really wanted to talk about, and maybe actually I want to talk about two things. One's really fast, and then the other's sort of big, and you can riff on it and tell me if. But one thing that we try to do at SAW, especially in the graphic novel group, where people do come in with an idea for something they want to do in 6 months or something, I say that a lot of times we see that person you want to be. Like, you know, we can already imagine you having finished this book, you know, and we really don't care if it's good. If it's as good as your brain wants it to be. We just want you to be that person that you came to us as, right? This person with this project. And I don't know, maybe I'm muddling it a little bit, but the point is that we believe when we sort of like create these little groups kind of impromptu, we believe that everybody's capable of this. And so a lot of times the biggest detriment is ourself. Like, we're the ones who don't believe we can do it, but we have all these people in this network anyway who do believe we can do it. So I just hope we lean on each other a little bit for that help.
Lean into the worst by leaning on the best people.
But the thing I wanted to riff on is in worrying, and this is riffing off of last week, worrying about like who wants to read my story. Is this story good enough and stuff like that? Is that I think there's a ritualistic aspect to some of our storytelling and some of our art making that we need to lean into. There's a lot of things that we do in life that's ritualistic, and we don't do it because it's original, or we don't do it because Barnes and Noble is going to knock on our door, you know, whether it's getting married or showering or any number of other ritualistic things we do. Let me see if I can think of some other things. But we do it because, well, for a number of reasons, like life will change in some way once we've done this thing, right? And I'll get particular and I'll talk about comics. Like you know, I had I made a comic about grief. I made a comic about grief early, but not super early, but early enough that that particular topic hadn't really been explored very much in comics. I don't know if that's true anymore, and I don't think if it matters. What matters is having gone through the I think the grief memoir is a good ritual for people who need it, is sort of where I'm getting at. I think the whatever comic is a good ritual for anybody. You know, if you're being called to make a certain kind of comic, then lean into the ritualistic aspect of it. Lean into the belief that doing it in a small community, again, I think the community is an important part of ritual. I'll talk about that in a minute, but leaning into the why you want to make it and doing it for those reasons, I think will serve you in motivating you, rather than the belief that like it has to, that quote somebody is out there wants to read it, and then thinking about agents and publishers and all this stuff, which always gets people crazy. Like, but thinking of it as like as a life transition that we want to go through, right? I want to finish a graphic novel. I want to do a nonfiction comic about this topic that really moves me, because I want to understand it better. I want to present it to people. And again, and on the tail end of that ritualistic aspect, anything we do that is ritualistic on a medium to large scale involves the community in some way anyway, right? We get married, or we have funerals, or all these other things we do with the community present, right? Because they acknowledge our transition from one part of life to another. I was not a graphic novelist, and now I am, because a handful of people in my community have read it. Anyway, sorry, that's what I wanted to sort of get to, because I really think that there are a lot of people we do see some overlap at SAW, for instance, in certain kinds of stories. And every once in a while, somebody gets hung up and saying like, why am I telling this story? It's already been told. I don't want to see people getting hung up on that. I want to see people saying, I need to pass through this. I desire deeply to make this work and to show people. And besides, you and I know everybody's story is different anyway, and I really like that. But it's hard to believe sometimes when we're in the beginning stages of something and we're feeling bad about ourselves. But so I want people to realize, like, it's not necessarily about you telling a unique story. It's about going through this process that we're here for and that we want to celebrate on the other side. Phew, that was a long one. Sorry.
Don't say you're sorry. We used to have a sorry jar at my
Oh,
house. Anytime someone said sorry, we had to put a quarter in there. But
wait. I have
this
to
is
say,
good or bad.
I rock. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, that's what you would pronounce it wrong. It's you're welcome for the monologue. Yeah, and then we'd end up with a lot of money in the sorry jar because there were other things that were off limits. I think three things. Just saying, I'm just saying, that was outlawed. Sorry, like copious sorry. Like if you step on the cat, yeah, it's okay to apologize. But and then air quotes. You're not allowed to use air quotes in the office. And we ended up with like $20 at the end of every month that we bought cupcakes with relentlessly. So I don't know if we were learning our lesson, but the cupcakes were great. So
What I don't want to digress too much because I do hope you'll say something in response to what I say, but we could do that at comics too. Anytime you say like, sorry, I didn't do the hands well, or sorry if my tree looks bad. It's like you got to put a quarter in the jar. You got to PayPal somebody. I don't know.
yeah, oh, that would be good. And then we'll take the money and I don't know.
Send it to some
Do
more.
something really good with it. I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but well, in response to what you're saying, well, it's fun. So, a habit that we try to get into on the Zoom calls is we each try to paraphrase what the other one is saying in the chat, which also helps me build a recap for the mighty network that Saw does kind of debriefings on before, after, and during podcasts and other things that happen. And it's also a really good note. Tom mentioned that we're building the Bootlegger's Guide to Comics, which is a book that's being written right now, but it's almost like it's being written in real time. Yeah, it was called The Sorry Jar, which would be a great New Yorker story title. Sorry, I'm multitasking. I'm looking over at the chat again. So I'm kind of listening to what Tom's saying. I also got a tiny piece of this in a very fragmented view. We have a shared Word document that we're using for weekly topics for the podcast. And all it said was, Tom, rituals, will explain, or something like that. So I was like, oh, I want to hear what Tom's saying. So I was processing it in real time with everybody else and trying to think about it. I like what you're saying about where we focus our energy and our spirit when we're thinking about the thing, and you like take that same energy that you're using to worry about your commercial audience or the viability of your story if 100 people told the exact same story before you, um, and channel that energy into, this is something I'm doing without anyone's permission, because I want to, because I'm present here and I'm passing through a place, and on the other side of it there are witnesses that are going to cheer me on, like a marathon or something. So me repeating what you're saying and then processing it for myself one more time, I think that's really great. I don't know if I've ever thought about anything like that, but I do think one of the reasons why Saw is valuable, and then one of the reasons why I like being friends with Tom, is that the collective memory of people's achievements, it's longer living than my own personal memory, like I said before. So there's a lot of times it's not even some case where I'm apologizing or actively diminishing what I'm doing, which is something I have a habit of, and I know a lot of artists do that. But not even doing that, there's just things that I sort of take for granted and don't think are particularly notable, and tell me like, remember when you said XYZ, and that was really smart. I was like, oh really? And then I'll think about it. I'm like, oh, I can see why you would say that, and now I want to talk more about it. So sometimes we just put something on paper and we're not really thinking too much about it, and we're not even being very critical of it, like, oh, this isn't very good. We're just like letting it breathe on paper, and then you get a couple eyes on it and they're like, this is fascinating. I never would have thought to do that way. I really love the pacing of this. having a lot of eyes on your work that have different sensibilities and everyone's kind of tuning into different things is really, really exciting. It can be a little confusing if you're looking for edits because everybody has a different opinion. Also, on the other hand, everyone might rally around the same thing like, wow, this is amazing for this particular reason. Everyone starts kind of creating a chorus of like, wow, this is really good. And this is the part that we like about it. And that might be something that you've never noticed before. So I think that's really interesting that, and in some ways, the witnesses on the other side of making the big scary thing are what you were looking for. I think we were looking for that when we were looking at the commercial viability of something, or is anyone going to publish this? Is anyone even going to read this? Does this even matter? On the other side, there are people waiting to read it, and it matters to them. And we're all creators, so like if we see you do well, we're like, I could do that. And that's a big part of when I teach a class at all. I'm like, I know that you guys can do this because I did it, and I really didn't think I could do it. So if I can do it, I know you can do it, and I'll help you. I'll help you find the way. So there is this kind of proof in the community, like, well, if they did it, it seems possible. Like to meet I don't know. If you ever like, I don't know how many people I've known that like have won the lottery, but I know a lot of people who have gotten their driver's license. And I failed my test twice, but I still got my driver's license. I would never drive a car right now, but knowing people that have done the thing that you want to do makes it feel like you're in the right place. It makes it feel a little less scary. It also makes it seem like a little less strange. Like, oh yeah, you can do that. You can make more than one graphic novel. You can make a bunch of them. It just sort of normalizes it. I think that's really cool.
That's great. Knowing people, I just put that in the chat. Knowing people who have done the thing you want to do is a big help and normalizes it. Cool. Let's look at this list.
Oh yeah, so that was our first one from Helen. So thanks, Helen. I hope we kind of talked a little bit about Helen's question, external deadlines. We kind of did. People seem to be the magic sauce. And then we had another one. This is interesting and just sort of a question in answer to our question. I want to know, does anyone ever feel guilty for drawing? I'm having some issues with this particular thing. It's hard work, but I like hard work. That's fun. It ends up not being hard, but the guilt is there. Like I'm maybe an imposter or something. And so that was the question. I initially responded, I said, I feel really guilty when I try to sit down to work on my novel, and I feel like less of a writer than an artist. So maybe there's something to the imposter thing that our questioner asked. And I don't know if I have a great answer, but have you ever felt guilt for drawing or making a comic?
Me?
Yeah.
I am
Moi.
no, I'm such an obliger and like a busy homemaker and also running the school that I feel guilty every time I draw because I'm like, oh, I'm not serving somebody else right now. So it's terrible. So like a lot of things, you have to like really put clear cut boundaries on things. And so sometimes I have to be like, okay, I'm giving myself an hour and I'm not going to feel guilty because it's only one damn hour in this entire week or whatever. Um, and I know everything else, and I've cleared the decks, and I know everything else is taken care of, right? I don't do that enough. So therefore, I feel guilty more often than I should. I should actually compartmentalize a lot more, and clear the decks and be way more systematic about it. But in fact, I try and sneak it in, and I feel kind of lousy. And then, but the questioner was also asking, like, when drawing goes easy, they feel guilty. Was I understanding that correctly? And
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
sure, I get that too. So
I
what?
felt
What
yeah,
about you?
I don't know if I have a good answer. I liked what you said, Tom, that you have, these clear boundaries you have to make in advance to, be like, "Look, I mapped it out." Like,
Mhm.
the hour of free time, I said I was gonna do it, so you're a person of your word and you're showing up for that, so it feels like a little more like you're, taking it for yourself intentionally versus like an apologetic, but then, like you said, there's sneaking sneaking in to get a little bit of the art stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I mean, I have more guilt. with trying to do things I'm not very good at, like trying to write prose. I feel really bad, but and the best way to describe it is guilt, but that might be more akin to like just not feeling great about my abilities. But usually when I'm drawing, I don't spend enough time in regular drawing practice or making personal projects, so usually there's someone on the other end waiting for the thing I'm working on, even if they don't know it. Like I recently did a little tiny drawing for my grandma. I drew her dog and I wrote favorite grandchild. And I thought it was hilarious. And it's true. Also she doesn't, I don't think, I mean, I guess I'm her grandchild, but I mean the competition is middle-aged humans and then like really adorable dogs. So it's is no contest. But I think if there's a particular person in mind, for example, if you're working with editors that have a deadline, you're like, I don't feel guilty working on it because someone asked for it and
Sure.
theoretically they're paying me for it. But I think that's de-incentivized me working for art's sake, for just making a thing um
Right. Well,
often
that,
in a
yeah,
sneaky way.
as an Eisner nominee, you're often contracted for things. And so,
Yeah, it's
but
in such
again,
high demand.
yeah, no, but yeah, actually having that contract probably it does alleviate the guilt, of course, because you're no longer like, being a, playing. You're no longer like just kind of doing it for yourself.
I also wonder if that's like a positive role, not to make it culty and about Saw, but this is a Saw podcast. But I wonder if that's like a positive role if someone's in the year-long program or the graphic novel intensive, or even in some of the weekly drawing groups or some of the free things that are available. Um, like knowing there's like a class structure, like a course structure, not a economy
Mhm.
class. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, I wonder if that's something that's positive out of the structure of having quarterly projects or an anthology coming up or just the I think in the graphic novel intensive, we don't necessarily have benchmarks. We kind of give you anecdotally, here's where you might be in your project, but it looks different for everybody. But we know on the calendar, the program generally lasts for 6 months. So just also having a time structure makes people sort of think about what they want to be accountable for in that amount of time realistically. And that's really helpful to kind of like have parameters. Um,
Yeah, and again, it's a shared experience. Like everybody's in the same sort of system of like, I have to get this work done in this amount of time. Other people are doing it, I can do it too. Um, with a training like the certificate course or any kind of art school or something, usually there's a reason for these parameters and for these deadlines, and not questioning them is a really good thing to get used to, right? Like I just have to do it. And hopefully that's something you can extend past art school. You can be like, I want to finish a painting by Thursday. Don't ask why, just do it because you've given yourself an assignment. It's really hard to carry through, but it's your job as an art student, if you're going to get quote the grade,
yeah, yeah,
to do that. So it's really good training.
yeah. There's some comments in the chat. Do you want to read them, Tom?
Anita says there's a lot of should this and should that. If I'm working on the things that are hard, but I'm getting somewhere, I'm supposed to be already there. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. It's sort of a catch-22, obnoxious self-criticism. Yeah, I'm that way. And again, this will be my 1 minute where I talk about music in the podcast.
Yay!
But I'm the same way with I'm so new to what this new art form I'm trying, and I think I should already be good at it. And so I'm just like, why aren't you good at this yet? But it's actually fun to sort of muddle through it and to not be good and to make garbage. But it's only sometimes fun, and the other times it's not fun because I'm I don't know, I'm a realistic person with aesthetic beliefs, and I'm not hitting any of the standards, but but if I let myself just be garbagey, it's fun. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And Darlene says, took me years and years to set boundaries for myself to make art and write. It wasn't until community opportunities opened up online that I realized I could make art and writing a priority. Yeah, that's great. And that's so great. I was in a writing group for a long time, in my early 20s, maybe 21, 22. and we'd go weekly, and I was like the youngest person there. And also I mostly wrote word jazz. So there'd be a topic, we'd reach in a hat, the topic would be like, um, yeah, I don't know, yesterday's news or something. And I'd be like, "Ba, ba, doo, doo, ba, yesterday's news going at you." I would just like, and it wasn't until, but I would write page after page of this stuff. And it wasn't until decades later, and I was still in touch with a couple of those people until decades later, and I realized he must have hated me. And I actually had the fortune of meeting re-meeting one of these people. His name's John. He's in Seattle at a conference just last year. And I said, "John, I just realized like I must have been so annoying." And he said, "You were finding your voice."
No. I think on the topic of socialization, like trying to meet the right friends, making real human connections out there as a cartoonist, from cartoonist to cartoonist, it's important to have friends that tell you what they think. It's also important to have friends that do not ever tell you what they think.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was a very welcoming community. And I didn't do anything bad in their living room, and I just was annoying with what I was writing, and but I was finding my voice, and they gave me that space. It was really wonderful.
that's cool.
Yeah. So maybe another thing on the list, or what do you think?
Yeah, so that's just
Just other.
this week's nod to word jazz. You don't know what to post on the network. We give you permission to post what you want to post. This is a good one from Virginia. I thought this was great. My drawings float. This is one of my issues. My drawings float. This means I have an idea. I draw the character or characters. They usually float in space, maybe the space on the page or the space in panel. I don't think they're talking about literal space, so that would also be awesome and very funny if that's all you ever drew and wasn't sure how to get out of the space zone, but I think you just mean no backgrounds. It seems too much of a bother to include backgrounds. When I do, they also float. Nothing touches anything else. My lines don't even connect. I thought this was great. This becomes an issue when I try to do a flood fill on the computer with digital work. You try to fill in an area and the whole picture gets dark. It becomes tedious to finish the illustration. I'm doing a project and struggling with that now. And I wrote on the network, ooh, the anvil in space. The terrible anvil goes to space. That's actually really fun. Um, I used to really hate backgrounds, and now it's one of my favorite things, and I don't really know why that is, and I don't think it's because I've gotten that much better at them, but I've made peace with them, and we sort of talked towards the beginning of the call about, like, props, I guess, like, thinking about the use of the information you're providing in the background. Another thing I noticed too with backgrounds is that, in movies, for example, music videos, you see it in car commercials, any kind of anything that we're just trying to deliver some info with film in particular, you have what's called an establishing shot that shows, let's say, the exterior of the house of Home Alone. And now we know that that's where we are and what time of year it is, and there's Christmas decorations, and we know in 5 seconds or less that where we are and what time we are in and what 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 the universe looks like. And then after that, we might see a little bit here and there, but we're not always seeing all the bricks on the outside of the house to be constantly reminded that that's where we are. And you can do the same thing in comics where you have an establishing shot, and then you just have a horizon line with some rocks, and then carry on for 60 pages, and you're like, "Well, we've been outside this entire time." Maybe it starts raining or maybe the light changes or something. You can also another really fabulous thing about comics that I love, it's not always appropriate, but you can have someone say what's happening. Rob brought it up in the chat earlier when we were complaining about how hard it is to make weird looking hand drawings look normal. Rob said you could just make it part of the plot, like, "Wow, that's a gigantic hand." So if someone's saying what it is, like, "Wow, did you see that speeding car go by?" If you draw like a blob and someone says that, that's what happened. So, like, leverage that for sure. Like, if the characters are saying that's what's going on, or that's what the caption box says, I think it was Betsy or someone else in the program a couple of years ago really hated those caption boxes that they use in like documentary film or like the beginning of action movies where it's like, uh Quantico, Virginia, 1997. And you're like, oh, it's just like the outside of a building, right? But it works. And I definitely used it more than once in the graphic novel with the veterans because I was like, I'm gonna draw the outside of this very specific airport, but I need you to know it's in Iraq and this is what year it is. And it was really helpful. So there's a couple of tricks that I think comics lends itself to. But Tom, do you have anything to say about backgrounds and
Yeah,
also not finishing your lines?
all of that. I have a lot to say about all that stuff, and I think
So
we should
cool.
start to wrap it up too. So
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
let's think about that. But I wrote down three things. Just as a quick digression, that thing you said about captions and like, Virginia, 1997 or whatever. Yeah, I have the same sort of like reflexive, almost like disgust with that. Like I'll see a really like famous film. It's one of the best films ever. I've never gotten around to see it. And it'll be like Shanghai, 1935. And I'm like, this is supposed to be a classic, and they're just telling me where it's happening. But of course you can do that. Of course you can. It's fantastic. Um, and the thing about wow, look at those crazy hands, if somebody's going to point that out, because I say totally lean into that. I would love to see that comic where people are commenting on just how crazy the things are getting. That back to what you were saying about improv comedy, that kind of thing tends to happen on stage a lot, and it can get a little bit annoying if they go too much into it, right? Where they're only
Right.
commenting on the performance and they're not actually making the story, right? So that is something to be careful of, but it really does allow the reader, the viewer, the audience, whatever, it allows them to be relieved of discomfort if they notice the bad hand and the characters notice the bad hand. And they can be like, oh, good, I don't have to worry about
Yeah,
it
it's not
anymore.
just
I don't
me.
have to feel
Is
bad for
that
the author anymore.
yeah, is Tom, do you know if that's breaking the fourth wall if someone's referencing the genre that they're working in? I get the third wall and the fourth wall confused.
It's meta for sure. I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe
it's meta. We can just call it meta, but and I mentioned the fourth wall, but I'll look it up later and make sure I correct.
hit it on another time.
One
Yeah.
of the walls is
But
being
it's very common, and it's actually pretty common in manga too, where you'll be like, two characters are talking, and I mean, just to go with Rob's example some more, you'll easily see a character, just maybe even like a semi like little, what do they call it, a super deformed or squished version of them saying, "Wow, I didn't know their hands could get that big."
Oh
Occasionally they'll
yeah.
comment on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, in manga when like characters get really emotional, they'll turn into like a tiny version of themselves and they'll get very emotive and they'll have waterfall tears. They have
And
some
then they'll comment on that. They'll say, "God, not with the waterfall tears again." And anyway, so
super
but
good.
but they're not
Background.
commenting on how bad the art is, because usually an assistant has done that and has been scolded into getting it correct. So anyway, um, but I wanted to comment on the fill tool also. It's like that's something else to lean into. You don't need to use the fill tool. You can paint behind your art, your line work, for instance, if that's what you're doing. I bet in really beautiful ways that let you not have to be worried about whether or not your lines are full or complete or touching, right? And there's so many elegant ways in which a color field behind your work or on top, although it'll look the same if we're talking about black line work, um, can be part of the display, part of the storytelling effect, just part of the mood, but it's not perfectly lined up with every line. And there's so many examples of that. People really been, since printing has gotten good in the last 20, 30 years, people are branching out with what can color do. And it's just so wonderful. Am
Yeah,
I
I'm
right?
trying to think. I did, well, there was a project Tom and I worked on, The Odyssey of Sergeant Jack Brennan, and I did probably about like 40 pages of comics. Um, and the backgrounds, I was drawing anytime I get panicked about a deadline, my drawing really falls apart. But it was just good enough. It was like, oh, this is pretty good. I'm doing the best. I was definitely running at full speed. And I would hand these pages off to Tom. And there was a parcel of pages where Tom was like, you didn't I want you to go back and finish these lines, like draw them all the way to the end. And I didn't realize that I was doing that, but there is something funny about politely drawing in a background after you've drawn like a really gorgeous figure. I think that's what I was doing, and I wasn't just taking my line all the way to connect with the figure or whatever was overlapping with it. A lot of beginning cartoonists will also not have anything overlap, like not have a character stand in front of the background. Everything's really isolated. So I was responding when I was reading Virginia's comment about everything just floats, when I realized I could overlap things, and again, talking about scale and design, making things really big or super duper itty bitty. First of all, if you don't know how to draw something, zoom way out and then no one will know that you don't know how to draw it because you can't even see it on the page. Like you can draw a silhouette of a horse in the distance versus like a close-up of a horse head. Like, what do you have time for? So yeah, but I was thinking about that. Like, there's things that I've maybe I'm just lazy, but I've gotten that old adage like work smarter, not harder. I was like, I don't want to do that. So it's just follow your bliss and your ignorance, I guess.
Work smarter, not harder is definitely the bootleggers, an adage to
And you don't have to be that smart. I don't want to toot my ignorance horn, but when I say work smarter, we don't have to elevate ourselves any more than where we're at. That's also important.
I mean, clearly that is our ending here. And you don't have to be that smart. Work hard. Don't work smarter, not harder. And you don't have to be that
But not that smart.
smart.
Maybe it's just work smart, not hard. It's like not like an implied achievement or pushing forward, just being smart.
Work consciously. But yeah, I really like that phrase of the witnesses are on the other side. Um, awesome. This has been another great, very general, broad-ranging um episode by two Eisner nominees. Um,
We're
um,
really great. I love this for us
so,
and for you.
but but do we have? I know we want to get a little more, and we want to get a little more detailed with future episodes. So, what are some topics coming up?
Oh, that's a great question, Tom. We have a little list going. Some of it's loosely based on a lot of posts I've already done on the network that we're using for the bootleggers book, but we had just kind of like a random grocery list, like could be genre specific stuff, like nonfiction comics, for example. It could be skill based stuff, like how to pencil before you ink. Maybe also early preliminary stuff, like ideas and concepts for your work, like how to turn raw material into something that looks like a comic, character turnarounds. But
Mhm.
there's also a lot of abstract stuff like how to not be fussy, which we've kind of talked about. Working really, really rendered versus working really loose, like cartoony or realism. What's the balance for what you're working on? Like, do you want it to be
Mhm.
loosey-goosey or fancier? So we have lots of different stuff. I feel like a lot of it is about drawing, but I think there's something about in all of these questions about sustainability. Like I want to make comics, but comics take a long time. So how do I do this is the first question. And then like how do I keep doing this? And then how do I make this, a little less painful? Hopefully fun.
Great. Okay, we've got a long list. That list we'll put in some organized fashion in the SAW network, and we'd love to hear some people riff with some specific questions on that. Yeah, how do I, how do I keep it sustainable? That's a great question. I think art, personally, I find art as a sustainable practice, as something that is with you for a very, very long time, is extremely rewarding. So I
Also, hot take here, I think being bad at it is a sustainable practice in itself. Like if there's something that's always bothering you about it, that's what keeps us going back. You're like, the neighbors have done XYZ with their trash again. Like if we have a thing we are obsessed with, I think that's as much as we don't like it, maybe that's this weird motivator.
You know what? I can't let that slide without saying there's this idea, like, let's say our one of our cartoonist students or friends, it just keeps drawing those bad hands, right? We're just gonna be like, there they are with those bad hands again, and we're just gonna keep coming back for it. You're right, you know?
Yeah.
And there's that phrase, keep giving them you until you is what they want,
Ooh, I
which I
love
heard
that.
once, and I really like that phrase because, like, bad hands and all, let's just try and be, I mean, we have to be earnest, and I think we have to be sincere, kind of like Linus in the pumpkin patch. But if we can't get those hands right and we keep making them weird, then we're gonna start loving them.
Yeah, and I think I said that on the last call, is like trying to find the worst part of yourself and leverage that because I know that's always going to show up to the drawing table is like my inability to do XYZ. I'm like, oh, this again. So if you can count on that being there, it can kind of be this really funny place to live where you're like, oh, okay, just gonna hang
Okay,
out.
let's leave with Rob's quote, I think. Although I want you to ask me about the King of Morocco someday, some future podcast. But Rob says that Dolly Parton says, figure out who you are and then do it on purpose. That's great. Perfect. Sendak couldn't draw horses, so they became monsters. Carol, thank you for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
I didn't know that at all.
And now everyone's trying to draw monsters that look like Maurice Sendak's monster.
Right? And that's how invention happens. All right. Jess, marvelous talking to you again. Everybody here at SAW, thank you so much for being here and being a part of the community, being witnesses to everything, and being your own self that you are in the Dolly Parton way. I mean, Jess, so we're not recording next week, but we're recording in 2 weeks.
That's true. So our next episode, the live recording, is gonna happen on February 1st, the second month of the new year. It's flying by already. So we'll be happy to see you. Probably in the morning. We're not sure, but
that'll give us some time to post that list and get some of those topics rolling. And we're
gonna So if you're in the SAW network, what is that? sawcomics.org.
Yeah.
Trying to talk like a professional on a podcast.
Members.sawcomics.org.
Yeah, so go there and we try to do recaps of the podcast and post links to the new episodes and solicit more questions. So we love hearing from you, and we'll give you like an organized sort of what's up next on the podcast episodes that are forthcoming.
Look, I've never said this ever in my life. Look for this podcast wherever podcasts are found. I guess you say that, and like us on whatever, and rate us or whatever. I don't know. All right, Jess, I'll talk to you next week or in 2 weeks. I'll talk to you before that. Everybody else in the network will talk also. Thanks so much.
Thank y'all. See you later.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.